Stay quiet, Mom. It's for your own good.
I can still taste the metallic fear in my mouth when I remember that day. I had just compiled the rainfall data from the past decade, proving that the riverside plains weren't just occasionally floodable. They were an essential part of the natural flood control system. My wrinkled fingers, marked by decades of noting weather patterns, trembled with anger as I organized the documents. The falsified reports I found in Renata's office left no doubt. It was ironic. I had spent 42 years reading clouds, predicting tornadoes, and helping save lives in this region, and now my own daughter was willing to put hundreds of people at risk to build a luxury resort, all for her and Warren's damned ambition. When the doorbell rang, I thought it was Lynn, my climatologist colleague. We had arranged to finalize our presentation for the public hearing. Instead, there stood Renata and Warren, with artificial smiles and a bottle of wine. "Surprise, Mom!" Renata's voice echoed through the entrance hall of my Victorian house, the same one I bought with my late husband when we moved to Grand Junction for me to take over as head of the Weather Forecasting Center. "Wasn't expecting you both." I kept the documents hidden in the folder under my arm. "I have a commitment in half an hour." Warren, in his impeccable suit and that politician smile that never reached his eyes, placed his hand on my shoulder. I resisted the urge to shrug it off. "That's why we're here, Delia," he said, his voice carrying that practiced concern he used at town halls. "We need to talk about these commitments of yours." I let them in, mainly because I wanted them gone quickly. My living room walls were covered with weather maps, satellite images, and handwritten notes, my ongoing work tracking the region's changing rainfall patterns. I noticed Renata exchanging glances with Warren as they surveyed my research. "Would you like some tea?" I offered, hoping to expedite whatever this was. "Mom, we're worried about you." Renata sat on my couch, not removing her designer coat. She never stayed long these days. "Dr. Caldwell says you've been showing signs of cognitive strain." "Dr. Caldwell?" I raised an eyebrow. "Warren's brother? The neurologist who's invested in your resort project?" The absurdity almost made me laugh. "I'm fine. What I'm not fine with is the environmental impact report your company submitted. The floodplain data is manipulated." Warren cleared his throat. "That's exactly what we mean, Delia. These conspiracies, the obsession with weather patterns. The community is concerned." "The community?" I placed my folder on the desk, careful to keep it away from them. "I am the community. I've saved more lives with my obsessions than your campaign has with empty promises." Renata stood up, unnaturally calm. "Mom, we've spoken with your doctor. We've arranged for you to have some rest, just for a few weeks, until after the stress of the town council vote." That's when I noticed the third person entering my living room. A nurse, based on her scrubs, carrying a small medical bag. She smiled apologetically. "What is this?" I stepped back, suddenly aware of the trap closing in. "It's for your own good, Mom," Renata said, her voice hollow. "You've been making concerning calls, sending emails with wild accusations. People are talking. This is ridiculous." I reached for my phone on the side table, but Warren was faster. "Just a mild sedative to help you relax," the nurse explained, approaching with a prepared syringe. "Your daughter has temporary healthcare proxy. She's concerned about acute stress response affecting your judgment." "Healthcare proxy? That's impossible." But even as I protested, I remembered signing papers Renata had brought over after my brief hospital stay for pneumonia last winter. I hadn't read them carefully enough, a mistake I would never have made in my professional life. I backed away, knocking over a stack of climate journals. "Get out of my house. I'm calling Sheriff Blackhorse." "Mom, please don't make this harder." Renata's voice cracked, showing the first genuine emotion, not concern, but frustration. "The renovations to our guest house are complete. You'll be comfortable there with full-time care until you're better." Better. What they meant was, until after the council approved their deadly project, until my evidence and testimony couldn't stop them. I ran for the back door, but at 68, I wasn't fast enough. The nurse caught my arm, and I felt the sharp pinch of the needle. The last thing I remember was looking through my kitchen window at the gathering storm clouds on the horizon. The irony wasn't lost on me even as consciousness faded. I had spent my life warning others of approaching dangers, yet had failed to see the storm brewing in my own family. I woke up in an unfamiliar bed, my mind foggy. The room was tastefully decorated in neutral tones, Renata's aesthetic, not mine. My colorful quilts and weather books were nowhere to be seen. Instead, framed photos of Zoe and landscapes I'd never visited adorned the walls. A guest room converted into a prison. The windows wouldn't open more than 3 inches. Child-proof locks, I realized with bitter irony. The door had no inside lock, and when I tried the handle, I found it secure from the outside. My cell phone was gone. The landline on the bedside table was dead. "You're awake." Renata appeared at the doorway, holding a tray with tea and toast. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been kidnapped by my own daughter." My voice was raspy, my throat dry from whatever they'd given me. "Don't be dramatic, Mom. It's a precautionary rest period. Dr. Caldwell diagnosed you with early-onset cognitive decline exacerbated by stress." She set the tray down and opened the curtains. "Look, you have a beautiful view of the garden." I didn't bother looking. "Where are my research materials? My laptop? We've put those away for now. Your obsessive behavior with weather patterns was becoming unhealthy." She smiled thinly. "The doctors believe your years of radiation exposure from weather radars may have contributed to your condition." I stared at her, recognizing the calculated lie. Weather radars use radio waves, not harmful radiation. She was building a narrative, distorting my life's expertise into symptoms. "I want to speak to Sheriff Blackhorse. She called yesterday after your episode at the climate committee meeting." Another lie. I hadn't been at any meeting. We explained everything. She sends her best wishes for your recovery. Days passed with maddening sameness. A nurse named Gretchen came each morning and evening to administer medication I was told was for anxiety. I pretended to swallow the pills but tucked them under my tongue, spitting them into the toilet later. My mind needed to stay clear. My room had books, bland bestsellers, nothing scientific. A television that only played approved channels. No news, no weather, no contact with the outside world. Zoe visited on the 3rd day, her teenage face tight with confusion. "Grandma, are you okay? Mom says you've been having episodes." I measured my words carefully, aware the room might be monitored. "I'm perfectly fine, sweetheart. Just tired. Tell me about your science project." As she described her work on local watershed impacts, I wrote on the notepad she'd brought, "Being held against will, help." Her eyes widened, but she continued talking seamlessly about water tables. Smart girl. When Warren appeared at the doorway, she casually flipped to a new page and sketched as we spoke. "Time for Grandma's rest," Warren announced after 15 minutes. "I'll come back soon," Zoe promised, tucking the notepad into her backpack. A small spark of hope ignited in my chest. That spark was extinguished the next day when Renata stormed in. Zoe's note crumpled in her hand. "This is exactly why you need supervision, Mom." Her voice was cold. "Traumatizing Zoe with paranoid delusions." "Where is she?" "At her father's sister's for the weekend. Away from this toxic environment." My prison tightened. The nurse now watched me take my pills, checking under my tongue. A new lock appeared on the bedroom door. Keypad entry. The windows were sealed completely. My meals became irregular, designed to disorient me about time. But they underestimated me. I hadn't spent 4 decades predicting dangerous weather patterns without learning to observe systematically, to find patterns in chaos. I started tracking the nurse's schedule by counting heartbeats. I noted which floorboards creaked, which house sounds indicated specific activities. I mapped the family's movements through sounds alone. At night, I carefully unraveled threads from my bedsheets and knotted them into patterns. A weather forecaster's version of a prisoner's calendar. Each night, I studied the small patch of sky visible from my window, tracking moon phases and cloud formations. 2 weeks in, I made my first discovery. The air vent in my bathroom connected to the home's central system. When the air conditioning ran, I could hear conversations from the kitchen below. "The council meeting is next Wednesday," Warren was saying. "Without Delia's testimony or her research, the environmental objections are significantly weakened." "What about Dr. Joe?" "She's still pushing back," Renata responded. "She's looking for Delia, claims they had meetings scheduled." "And?" I told her Delia's taking extended personal time following a health scare. She seemed suspicious, but what can she do? I pressed my ear closer to the vent. How long do we need to keep this up? Renata asked, her voice smaller. Just until after the vote. Then we can transition her to that nice facility in Denver we looked at. Best neurological care and far from local gossip. My blood ran cold. They were planning to institutionalize me permanently. That night, as a spring thunderstorm rolled in, I formulated my plan. I needed to get a message out, and I needed leverage. Knowledge had always been my power, and even imprisoned, I could gather it. I began with the one tool they couldn't take away, my trained memory. Each snippet of conversation, each glimpse of documents when my door was opened, each schedule pattern was meticulously filed in my mental database. And I waited for the perfect storm. My opportunity came 3 days later. The barometric pressure had been dropping steadily. I could feel it in my joints, a meteorologist's reliable barometer. A significant storm system was approaching, exactly the kind I'd studied my entire career. Through the bathroom vent, I overheard Warren on the phone with the project investors. Yes, we've addressed all environmental concerns. The old flood data is irrelevant. My wife's mother? Just aging-related confusion. Nothing credible. That night, I heard Renata and Warren arguing about attending a fundraising dinner. We can't both go, Renata insisted. Someone needs to stay with her. The nurse will be here, Warren countered. This dinner has the governor's aide attending. We need this connection for when the environmental lawsuits inevitably come. So they knew their project was legally vulnerable. I filed that information away. They compromised. Renata would go alone, returning early. Warren would join later if all was quiet at home. The pieces were falling into place. When Nurse Gretchen brought my evening medication, I noticed her distraction. She kept checking her phone between administering my pills and taking my blood pressure. "Everything all right?" I asked, my voice deliberately frail. "My sister's in labor," she admitted. "First baby." I feigned swallowing my pills while offering grandmotherly advice about childbirth. When she left, I immediately spit them out. I needed my full faculties tonight. As predicted, the storm intensified around 8 p.m. Wind rattled the windows and rain lashed against the house. Perfect weather for my purposes. Noisy, disruptive, and familiar territory for me. At 8:30, I heard the front door close as Renata left for the dinner. At 9:15, Nurse Gretchen received a phone call that sent her pacing anxiously. At 9:45, she knocked on my door. "Mrs. Everett, I have an emergency. My sister's having complications. Mr. Caldwell said I could leave early since you're settled for the night." Her ethical dilemma was written across her face. Duty versus family. "Of course, dear. Family comes first." I smiled reassuringly. "I'll be fine. I take sleeping pills anyway." After she left, I waited 30 minutes, counting seconds by my practiced heartbeat. Then I moved to the next phase of my plan. Over weeks of captivity, I'd been preparing. I'd loosened a metal strip from the bed frame, not enough to be noticed, but enough to serve as a crude tool. I'd studied the keypad lock during nurse shift changes, noting the wear patterns on specific numbers and the faint sound differences between each button. The lock was a basic 4-digit code. Based on Warren's laziness with passwords, something I'd noticed during family gatherings, I suspected it was something simple. Their anniversary date was my 3rd attempt. The lock clicked open. I moved silently through the dark house, avoiding the creaky floorboards I'd mentally mapped. In Warren's home office, I found my confiscated phone, dead of course, but more importantly, I located my research files, hastily stuffed into a cabinet. I took only what I needed, the most damning evidence of data manipulation, plus photos I'd taken of the actual floodplain. I also found something unexpected. Medical documents with forged signatures indicating I'd consented to psychiatric evaluation and treatment. The storm was reaching its peak as I made my way to the kitchen. I needed to work quickly. I knew Warren would be home soon, especially with the nurse gone. I tried the landline. Disconnected. All external doors had electronic locks requiring a code I didn't know. But the kitchen window had a design flaw I'd noticed during my first week here. The electronic sensor was improperly installed, with a gap between the connection points. As I worked to exploit this vulnerability, headlights swept across the driveway. Warren was home early, The storm likely cut the fundraiser short. In desperation, I abandoned subtlety. I grabbed a heavy cooking pot and smashed it against the window. The safety glass cracked, but didn't shatter completely. I hit it again as the front door opened. "Delia? What was that noise?" Warren's voice carried from the entryway. I struck the window a third time. It finally gave way with a crash partially masked by a thunderclap, but not completely. "What the hell?" Warren's footsteps pounded toward the kitchen. I had seconds. The jagged window was too dangerous to climb through. Instead, I did what I'd done for 40 years during emergencies. I screamed a warning. "Help! Kidnapped! Help me!" My voice, trained through decades of emergency weather broadcasts, projected clearly through the broken window despite the storm. I screamed again as Warren burst into the kitchen. "Are you insane?" He lunged for me, grabbing my arm roughly. "Get away from there." "Help! I'm Cordelia Everett. I'm being held prisoner." Warren dragged me backward, his fingers digging into my flesh. "Shut up! Do you want the neighbors to hear you?" "That's exactly what I want," I spat back, fighting against his grip with strength I didn't know I still had. As we struggled, the kitchen lights suddenly flooded the room. In the doorway stood Hector Mendoza, my neighbor of 15 years, soaking wet and wide-eyed. Behind him was his adult son, Miguel. "Delia, what's happening?" Hector's voice was cautious, taking in the broken window, my disheveled appearance, and Warren's grip on my arms. Warren instantly transformed, his politician's mask sliding into place. "Thank goodness you're here, Hector. My mother-in-law is having a severe episode. She's been under psychiatric care." "He's lying," I cut in. "They've kept me prisoner for weeks. They're trying to silence me about the Riverside project. They forged medical documents." Hector looked between us, uncertainty clear on his face. "She needs her medication," Warren insisted smoothly. "Dr. Caldwell has diagnosed her with—" "Warren's brother is the doctor," I interrupted. "It's a conflict of interest. Call Sheriff Blackhorse. Call Dr. Lin Zhou at the university. They've been keeping me drugged and isolated." Miguel stepped forward, his posture protective. "Why is the window broken, Mr. Caldwell?" "She's having a paranoid episode." "Then why were you hiding her research?" I countered, pulling the documents from my pocket. "Why disconnect the phones? Why lock me in?" The uncertainty in Hector's eyes hardened into suspicion, directed at Warren, not me. "Miguel," Hector said quietly, "call the sheriff." Sheriff Tanya Blackhorse arrived 20 minutes later with 2 deputies. By then, the storm had somewhat abated, leaving behind that peculiar stillness I'd observed after thousands of weather events, nature catching its breath before deciding what comes next. Warren maintained his composure admirably, spinning a tale of my deteriorating mental health with the smooth delivery that had won him 3 terms on the city council. I sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket Hector's wife had brought over, watching the sheriff's face for any sign she believed him. "Mrs. Everett has been increasingly paranoid," Warren explained, his voice dripping with rehearsed concern. "The stress of aging, combined with her obsession about the development project. Dr. Caldwell recommended supervised rest." Sheriff Blackhorse, a steady woman whose family had lived in Grand Junction for generations, turned to me. "Delia, I've known you 30 years. Tell me your side." I spoke methodically, like delivering a weather briefing. "They've kept me prisoner for 19 days. They're trying to silence me because I discovered their environmental impact report uses falsified flood data." I placed my rescued documents on the table. "The Riverside project would compromise our natural flood barriers. I have proof. That's why they locked me away." The sheriff examined the papers, her expression unreadable. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Caldwell." "With all due respect, Sheriff, these are the delusions, Dr. Caldwell diagnosed," Warren countered. "My wife has healthcare proxy due to her mother's condition. Everything we've done is legal and medically advised. Then you won't mind if we verify that with an independent doctor?" The sheriff's tone made it clear this wasn't a question. Warren's mask slipped for just a second. "Of course not, but it's nearly midnight. Surely this can wait until—" "I've already called Dr. Ramos to meet us at the hospital," she interrupted. "And I'd like to see these healthcare proxy documents." As if on cue, Renata's car pulled into the driveway. She rushed in, designer dress and perfect makeup contrasting with the chaos of the kitchen. "What's happening? Mom?" Her eyes darted between me, Warren, and the sheriff. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm taking your mother for a medical evaluation," Sheriff Blackhorse stated firmly. "But we have authorization, which we'll review. For now, I'm acting on a potential elder abuse report." The look Renata shot Warren contained equal parts fury and fear. Their perfect plan was unraveling. At the hospital, Dr. Ramos, a no-nonsense physician I'd known since she was a young intern, conducted a thorough examination. Blood tests revealed traces of sedatives not prescribed to me. A neurological evaluation showed no signs of cognitive impairment. "Physically, she's dehydrated and showing minor effects of the sedatives," Dr. Ramos reported to Sheriff Blackhorse. "Mentally, she's sharper than most of my staff." By morning, the hospital's patient advocate had helped me file a restraining order against Renata and Warren. Dr. Lin Zhou arrived with a stack of our research and confirmation that I'd never missed any climate committee meetings, exposing another of their lies. "They kept saying you were having episodes at meetings you never attended," Lin explained, her outrage evident. "I knew something was wrong when you stopped responding about the flood data." The investigation moved swiftly after that. When deputies searched Renata and Warren's home, they found my original research locked in Warren's safe, along with documents showing they'd established a trust in my name, with Renata as sole trustee using forged signatures. Most damning of all, they discovered emails between Warren, his brother Dr. Caldwell, and the development company discussing handling the Cordelia problem. My own voice, recorded without my knowledge during private conversations where I'd expressed concerns about the project, had been selectively edited to sound incoherent and paranoid. 3 days after my escape, I sat in Sheriff Blackhorse's office reviewing their findings. "We're filing multiple charges," she explained. "Unlawful imprisonment, elder abuse, forgery, fraudulent use of medical credentials, and conspiracy." "Will it stick?" I asked. "The evidence is overwhelming, Delia, and we found 2 other elderly residents who were pressured by Warren and the development company to sell their riverside properties." She shook her head. "Your case broke open something bigger. I was staying with Hector and his family, unable to return to my own home, which felt tainted by Renata's intrusion. That afternoon, Zoe showed up at Hector's door, tear-stained and confused. "Grandma, I'm so sorry," she sobbed into my shoulder. "I tried to tell Dad the note seemed serious, but he said you were confused. I didn't know what to believe." I held her close, feeling her shoulders shake. "You did nothing wrong, sweetheart. They're saying Mom might go to jail, that Dad manipulated medical records. The truth needs to come out, Zoe. People could have died if they built on that floodplain." Her eyes, so like mine, searched my face. "Did you know that Mom would do something like this?" I considered lying to protect her image of her mother, but Zoe deserved honesty. "I knew your mother was ambitious. I never thought she'd go this far." 2 weeks later, standing at the podium during the city council hearing, I presented the accurate flood data. The packed chamber listened in stunned silence as I methodically dismantled the developers' falsified environmental reports. News of my imprisonment had spread through town like wildfire, lending weight to every word I spoke. The proposed riverside resort would be built on land that has flooded 6 times in the past 30 years, I explained, pointing to my lifetime of meticulous records. The developer's report omitted these events by selectively choosing data points from drought years. The council voted unanimously to reject the development proposal and launch a complete review of all projects approved during Warren's tenure. It was a vindication that tasted bittersweet, professional triumph overshadowed by personal betrayal. Outside the chamber, reporters swarmed. One thrust a microphone toward me. "Mrs. Everett, how do you feel knowing your own daughter was willing to have you committed to push through this development?" The question hit like a physical blow. I paused, aware that my answer would be broadcast across local news. I searched for the right words. "I feel like I've witnessed both the worst and the best of humanity these past weeks. My daughter and son-in-law's actions reflect a prioritization of profit over people that has become too common. But I've also experienced extraordinary kindness from neighbors, colleagues, and this community." Another reporter called out, "Will you press charges against your daughter?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Actions have consequences. Renata and Warren didn't just betray me. They conspired to endanger this entire community for financial gain. The preliminary hearing came 3 months later. I sat in the courtroom, back straight, watching as Renata and Warren entered in matching navy suits, their expressions carefully neutral. They didn't look at me. The evidence was presented methodically: forged documents, manipulated medical reports, recorded conversations about keeping me sedated, emails discussing the Cordelia problem. With each new revelation, Renata's shoulders hunched further. During a recess, she approached my bench, Warren and their attorney trailing behind. "Mom," her voice was barely above a whisper, "we'd like to discuss a plea agreement." I studied the face I'd once known better than my own. "Why should I agree to that?" "For Zoe's sake," she said, "so she doesn't have to testify or sit through a trial." "You should have thought about Zoe when you were planning to drug her grandmother indefinitely," I replied coolly. "No deal." Warren leaned forward. "Be reasonable, Delia. We made a mistake." "But a mistake?" I cut him off. "A mistake is miscalculating rainfall patterns. What you did was methodical, calculated evil for personal gain." Their attorney intervened, steering them away as the bailiff announced court was resuming. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Zoe did testify, bravely describing how her concerns about my absence had been dismissed. Dr. Caldwell admitted to falsifying medical reports without examining me. The developer's CEO testified that Warren had assured him the environmental problems would be handled in exchange for a consulting position after his counsel term ended. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, I felt no joy, only a hollow vindication. Renata received 8 years for elder abuse, false imprisonment, and fraud. Warren got 12, his sentence enhanced by abuse of public office charges. As Renata was led away, she finally met my eyes. I expected to see hatred, but instead recognized something else: the dawning realization of what she'd thrown away. She would never again practice law or real estate. Her reputation was destroyed. Her marriage was crumbling as Warren's attorney prepared an appeal blaming her for everything. I didn't visit her in prison. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. Instead, I focused on reconstruction of a different kind. 6 months after the trial, I stood before the city council again, this time presenting a community-based early warning system for flash floods, a project funded by the fines paid by the development company. The grant established educational scholarships for environmental science students, with Zoe as the first recipient. My home was sold. Too many painful memories lingered there. I used the proceeds to purchase a modest cottage overlooking the river, where I continued my weather observations and mentored young meteorologists. Zoe visited every Sunday, learning the patterns of clouds and barometric pressure readings that had been my life's work. Together, we tracked storms and predicted weather events with remarkable accuracy. "Do you ever miss Mom?" she asked one evening as we watched lightning illuminate distant mountains. "I miss who I thought she was," I answered honestly. "I miss the daughter I believed I had." "She writes me letters," Zoe admitted, "asking about you." "What do you tell her?" "The truth, that you're stronger than ever." She squeezed my hand. "That you're teaching me everything you know." On the anniversary of my escape, Hector and the Neighborhood Association organized a surprise celebration they called Delia's Weather Warning Day, now an annual community preparedness event. Standing before my friends and neighbors, I realized that in losing my daughter, I had gained something precious, a community that valued truth, knowledge, and the wisdom that comes with age. The storms in my life had cleared, leaving behind a landscape forever changed, but ultimately stronger. Like the river that periodically overflows its banks, a natural process that, while destructive, ultimately renews the soil, I had emerged from chaos with renewed purpose. I may be in my 70s, but my story is far from over. In fact, it's just beginning. Last month, I testified before the state legislature about strengthening elder protection laws. They're calling it Cordelia's Law, legislation that would create enhanced penalties for family members who exploit elderly relatives and establish stricter oversight for medical power of attorney transfers. The room fell silent as I described how easy it was for Renata and Warren to nearly erase my existence. "This isn't just my story," I told them. "For every elder who escapes and fights back, dozens remain trapped in silent prisons created by the people who should love them most." After my testimony, 3 different elderly couples approached me privately, whispering similar stories of adult children, pressuring them to sign away homes, savings, or decision-making rights. I gave them Sheriff Blackhorse's contact information and connected them with the advocacy network I've helped establish. They call me the Weather Warrior now, a title I wear proudly as I travel to senior centers across Colorado, teaching older adults to recognize the warning signs of exploitation and financial abuse. Just as I once tracked storm patterns to keep my community safe, I now track the subtle indicators of elder abuse to protect my generation. If you've been moved by my story, please hit that subscribe button. No one should face elder abuse alone. Share this video to spread awareness. And remember, sometimes the darkest storms lead to the brightest rainbows. I'll be back next week with another chapter of my journey to justice.